morning, everybody, and welcome to Ridouts webinar on CQC's new regulatory regime. It is great to see so many of you here today. I know we are all desperate for information about the new regime. CQC has been drip feeding as its plans, or rather its half-baked plans, for a number of months. So I think what we're going to be doing today is sharing with you our views on what we know about the regime, what is still outstanding, and what it will mean for you, or what we think it will mean for you as a provider, and how it could impact your business. Today I am joined by colleagues Gemma Nicholas and Laura Payton. Pete Shelton. I've confused or forgotten your married name, Laura, there. And they are going to be talking you through the regime. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on Ridouts' website and YouTube channel. And there will also be an opportunity for Q&As, which we'll do at the end of the webinar. If you have any questions, then do please pop them in the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom of your screen. Also, if you have any knowledge that you want to share, I think it's this type of sharing of information which will help the sector be better prepared for this new regime, which is imminently coming into force. Slides will also be available, and we will be sending those to all attendees shortly after the webinar, so hopefully later on today. And that will be along with a feedback form. We do always welcome feedback on our webinars and our events, because it really helps us to shape events that are pertinent and relevant to you. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma, who is going to kick us off, and I'll let them begin. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Caroline. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start with looking at where it all began in relation to the new regime. So the CQC's new regulatory regime is a realisation of its strategy, which was published back in May 2021. The strategy set out the CQC's ambitions under 4 themes: people and communities, which is all to do with it being easier for people to tell the CQC about their experience of using health and social care services; smarter regulation, which relates to better use of technology for the CQC to constantly monitor providers; safety through learning, which is about services ensuring staff know how to keep people safe, staff feeling confident to whistleblow, and services learning lessons when things go wrong; and also accelerating improvement, which is the CQC's aim to work closely with services and share good practice. In April this year, the CQC reflected on its strategy, calling the new regulatory approach a complex transformation. Notably, the CQC stated that it will adapt its plans along the way, which we have definitely seen over the past 2 years. I will now hand to Laura, who will take you through the first major change, the provider portal.
Morning, everyone. Nice to see so many people here virtually this morning. One of the main changes under CQC's new regime is the provider portal. I was at the Care Show recently, where one of the panel events, there was a CQC inspector speaking, and she commented on the portal, and I think quite accurately summed it up as a bit of a bone of contention, both at CQC and with providers at the moment. But what is supposed to be changing? Well, the provider portal will be the way that you give all of your interactions with CQC, basically. The CQC say that it will make it easier than contacting them by phone or email. I mean, I don't know what experience you guys have had recently of trying to get in touch with CQC, but trying to get through at the National Customer Service Centre can be very difficult sometimes. CQC have said it will enable you to share information with them in real time. You can validate the information that CQC holds about you and comment on CQC's concerns in real time. But the timeframes are something that seem to have been a bit skewed. I don't know what the experience of people on the call is this morning, but there was to be a pilot in August 2023. I think it was 230 providers were invited to the new portal, allowing them to explore its functionality and to allow CQC to deal with any glitches, etc. The rollout was due to begin in September 2023 in phases. Now we're in almost November tomorrow. The vast majority of providers that I have spoken to over that time period have not yet received an invitation to the new portal. So I will be interested to hear what people's experience is. It sounded from the talk at the care show that I was at that there were still issues to be ironed out. One thing, and if we could go on to the next slide actually, one thing that was asked about and that we were wondering about is, will there be a limit to the information that you can upload for CQC to look at? The particular focus of the talk that I was at and an interest that I have was going from requires improvement to good, or going from good to outstanding, and the possibility of using the provider portal as a tool to provide lots of information to show that you've improved. It wasn't clear, and CQC weren't clear whether there would be any limits on what you could upload. So yeah, I mean, I guess the portal begs more questions than it answers at the moment. How exactly will it work? I haven't seen it. I'm not a provider, so we don't tend to get invited to it. But as I say, clients that I've spoken to recently are not in the new portal yet. CQC are saying, oh, well, you'll always know what we know about you. We'll both be able to see what other organisations have provided on the portal, which could be interesting. CQC hasn't always shared, especially detail of information that they receive from stakeholders, particularly concerns. Other questions, though, will you be able to challenge and comment on documents that are in the portal? If you do, how will CQC take that into account? Will it mean that there's a back and forth, protracted discussions via the portal? How exactly will it be used to affect ratings? Will the information be shared with commissioners? And like we've mentioned already, will there be limits to how much information providers can upload? And I guess the key question is, when will everyone be on it? The timeframe was meant to be by March 2024, all providers would be invited. But I'm not sure where CQC are at with that timeframe. But as a practical point, it would be the nominated individual and registered managers that would receive the invitation with the login details. So it's really important that you as providers make sure that your nominated individual and registered manager details and contact details are up to date with CQC. So that's the portal, and I'll hand you back to Gemma to talk about CQC as an organisation.
Thanks, Laura. So CQC as an organisation is also changing. The CQC is reorganising its operational teams. They are bringing together their specialist sector teams, so that's adult social care, hospitals and primary medical services, into one operations group. The team of specialist inspectors will divide into 4 geographic networks. So that's London and East of England, Midlands, North and South. And then they will divide further into local teams. An operations manager will lead each of the teams, and the teams will be made up of assessors who collect and consider evidence, inspectors who also collect evidence and lead on enforcement, regulatory coordinators who triage information, and regulatory officers who carry out administrative duties, as well as specialist advisors. Now, the CQC believes that the new team arrangements enables it to provide efficient support and for them to have better conversations with providers. The CQC suggests that you can speak with members of your local team for different types of advice and rely less on one person, i.e. previously your inspector, to provide support. What has not been explained by the CQC is how you will communicate with your local team, if it will be through the provider portal, as Laura's mentioned, or whether you'll be able to speak to a person via the telephone. Furthermore, it appears that due to the role of the assessor, providers will or may be in contact with assessors as well as inspectors in relation to evidence regarding their service. So what we'd say is you should remain alert to the CQC personnel involved in monitoring your service and try to keep everyone copied in. Thank you. I'll hand over to Laura again. Thanks.
So the next couple of slides I'm going to take you through are just about the single assessment framework more generally. And what we know, and as we know, it's been drip fed to us, so it can be quite difficult actually to see how it all fits together, but hopefully we are getting there ahead of the rollout. So as you well know, the single assessment framework will replace the 4 existing frameworks, and the idea is that there's a single framework for all types of providers, which should make things much more straightforward. Assessments are the way in which CQC monitor your services, and the CQC have said that they will no longer be tied to set dates or driven by previous ratings. This is another bone of contention and something that providers speak to me about, day in, day out. Every event that I've been to recently, this has been an issue. How do services, especially that requires improvement, get up to good? And it's really disappointing for those providers that the provider handbook has already been updated to remove the previous set timeframes that we knew, 6 months if you're inadequate, etc. CQC haven't published any timeframes because they say that they are moving away from this. They did actually touch on this at the talk I was at. The CQC inspector mentioned this, and they recognised that it was a difficult issue. And they seem to think, although they didn't explain precisely how, that the new assessment framework and the new way of monitoring would allow this to improve. And that's because one of the things that CQC are going to do is collect evidence on an ongoing basis. And whilst something hasn't changed, that they will still cross the threshold and do inspections, that will only be one of the tools that they'll use to gather evidence and assess quality and make decisions about ratings. So, I mean, potentially that is transformative to the current regime, the idea that CQC could change your rating without visiting your service. However, it's great if you're looking to move up a rating band, but if CQC are looking to downgrade you without visiting the service, I think that's something that you would want to be live to potentially challenging on the basis of how they've gathered that evidence, but that's something that we'll move on to. The framework's to be rolled out in November 2023 regionally, and I've got a slide a little bit later on this about the timeframes because some new information came out last week, which is interesting on that. But there's a sort of pilot with a limited number of providers in the south of England, and then the framework is to be phased up until March 2024. If I could have the next slide, please. I've already sort of touched on this actually, as usual, rambling off on my first slide. But one of the key important issues on the single assessment framework is the scheduling of assessments, or rather the lack thereof. CQC have mentioned in some of their documents that there will be a planned set. So priority quality statements that need to be assessed within a specific time period for each sector. And you'll forgive me if I've missed this because there has been a lot of guidance come out recently about the quality statements, but I haven't seen any sort of information about which ones are to be prioritised over which time periods, although I'll be welcome to be corrected on that. Having looked through the guidance, there's a lot of information about what the quality statements are, etc., and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But from what I can work out in terms of scheduling, there isn't any detail for providers to have any sort of concrete framework to know when CQC will be back. They're continuing to talk about responsive regulation and real-time data from the portal, etc., and really being live to what comes in. I mean, to me, it just feels a little bit like a rebranding of risk-based regulation, which is what they say that they're moving away from. And the risk-based regulation is why we are in the situation with lots of providers stuck and unable to move up the ratings because they're not flagging as of concern. So hopefully what we will see is that positive information uploaded to the portal, and that can include from providers as well, should also flag reassessments. But like everything with this new regime, it will remain to be seen how it plays out. Can I have the next slide, please? I mean, this is really, I'm not going to talk you through this in any great detail. It's something that will be useful to have when you have the slide. You've probably seen it already, but it's just a snapshot of the new framework. You'll see that the 5 key questions, safe, caring, responsive, effective, well-led, those ones that we all know and love, they're not going anywhere. What is in the bin, if you like, is the Chloe prompts. And what they're bringing in now are the quality statements and the evidence categories. And that's what we're going to move on to talk about. Gemma's going to start with quality statements, and then I'll have a chat with you about the evidence categories. So if we could have the next slide, and then back to Gemma. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Laura. So as Laura has said, the 5 key questions remain, but quality statements and evidence categories are being introduced. So in relation to quality statements, the Chloe's, prompts and ratings characteristics are going to be replaced by 36 quality statements. And they're also known as WE statements, which you can access on the link in the slide. The quality statements focus on specific topics under the 5 key questions. So SAFE has 8 quality statements, caring 5, effective 6, responsive 7, and well-led has 8. And the quality statements link to the regulations. So they link to the Health and Social Care Act 2008 Regulated Activities Regulations 2014, often referred to as the Regulated Activities Regulations, and the Care Quality Commission Registration Regulations 2009, often referred to as the Registration Regulations. So let's move to the next slide and see an example. So there's the 6 of the 36 quality statements sit under effective. So sit under the effective key question. The quality statements under effective are listed on the slide, and as you can see, they include assessing needs, delivering evidence-based care and treatment, etc. And the quality statement of assessing need links to regulations 9 and 12 of the Regulated Activities Regulations. So when you take a look, which you probably have already, when you look at the quality statements, you will see the we statement followed by I statements. The we statement applies to the service. It is the statement that the CQC expects providers to meet. And the I statement reflects what people have said matters to them. So what service users believe matters to them. So sticking to the assessing needs quality statement as an example, I'll just read to you. So the we statement states, we, that's the service, maximise the effectiveness of people's care and treatment by assessing and reviewing their health, care, well-being and communication needs with them. And the I statements include I, so that's the service user, can get information about advice and about my health, care and support and how I can be as well as possible physically, mentally and emotionally. The statements also include I, so that's the service user, have care and support that is coordinated and everyone works well together and with me. I have care and support that enables me to live as I want to, seeing me as a unique person with skills, strengths and goals. And I am empowered to get the care, support and treatment that I need and want. So the best thing to do is to take a look at the CQC's website. As I said, the link is on the previous slide. It will become clearer, but most importantly, familiarise yourself with the quality statements, the we statements and the I statements. Next slide, please. Over to Laura. Thank you.
Thanks, Gemma. So yeah, Gemma's talked about the quality statements, and one thing about them that's been the subject of quite a lot of criticism is that the CQC is not prescriptive, and it doesn't specify what providers should do or can do in order to meet the quality statements. The only steer that CQC have given us on this is the different categories and types of evidence that it will focus on when they are assessing a particular quality statement. And these are known as the evidence categories. And this is one of the most recently updated pieces of information on the CQC's website. So I would point you in that direction if you've not seen that already, as part of the drip feed of what is coming out. But in summary, basically, there's 6 evidence categories and they're all on the screen in front of you just now. And so under each quality statement, CQC is going to use each of these categories to gather evidence. Now, I would urge providers to have a think about this and look at the focus on feedback, really. So the categories are people's experience of health and care services. So that's obviously your service users, but also, families, etc. Feedback from staff and leaders, really important. Feedback from partners and stakeholders. And as we know, a lot of information is fed to CQC, sometimes in the background, and hopefully the portal might make this a bit more transparent. Observation, well, you would think that would be from your inspection on the ground, crossing the threshold. Processes and outcomes. Outcomes are a really interesting one in terms of how you prepare for inspection and how you present the best case. I think something that you will need to do under the new inspection regime, if you're not doing it already, in order to ensure good outcomes. Well, that's a bit ironic. To ensure good outcomes at your inspection, look at your outcomes and map out how your care and how the good quality care that you provide, how your good processes, etc., translate to good outcomes for your residents and patients. So that could be as simple as preparing little case studies to put in front of CQC. That was an example that was given by, again, someone at a talk that I attended about preparing for inspections. Could I have the next slide, please? Again, this next slide deals with the focus that CQC have shifted to on feedback. Now, when we used to deliver talks on preparing for inspections and when we used to help providers post-inspection, you can guarantee that, you know, when CQC would come in, they would always speak to the service user or the family member that you didn't really want them to speak to, and you would see that time and again come through the report, and it wasn't triangulated, etc. I think issues like that are going to become more prominent under the new inspection regime unless providers take steps to really proactively prepare for it. If you look at the evidence categories on that last slide, you know, CQC say that they're all weighted equally, but look at how many of them. I mean, at least 3 out of those 6 evidence categories are based on people's feedback, and that's something that you have limited control over what they will say, but you have control over how you collate it, how you update it, how you act on it, and how you present it to CQC. And an example of that is mapping it through with the outcomes. In terms of the practicalities, what evidence type goes with which quality statement, this does depend a little bit on the type of service that you are. And the CQC have mapped this out in more detail on its website. And I've linked the section of it in this slide so you can have a look at once you get the slides. The CQC has said that, you know, the assessment framework places people's experience at the heart of CQC's judgments. If CQC receives feedback of poor care, it will review and gather more evidence, even if other evidence sources have not identified any issue. So that's really interesting. CQC will also collect and review evidence of some categories more often than others. So, for example, they will take people's feedback more often than they will processes. That could be a good thing. It could be a difficult thing, you know, thinking about whistleblowers, disgruntled, not so much whistleblowers, but disgruntled staff, or, you know, people making complaints about the service that are perhaps unjustified. I mean, that could perhaps trigger a review of ratings. So something to be live to. And I think the key takeaway from the evidence categories information that I've read is that you really need to focus on feedback, basically. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so CQC might only look at one quality statement, and they can update scores for different evidence categories at different times. Will that be proportionate? Will it result in a fair outcome? So, for example, SAFE has 8 quality statements, but if you look at one, can that downgrade the overall key question rating, despite it being, you know, 1/8 of what makes a service safe? Updating one evidence category can mean that you know, it can update the quality score, and we'll come into scoring a little bit further. It's a little bit more complicated. But what if something has changed in another category that CQC hasn't looked at? So it's all, I mean, there's still a lot of questions to be answered on it, but what I would say is that a key thing that you can do to prepare is look at how you gather your feedback, how you analyse it. It's not just a case of, oh yeah, we send out surveys or we've got a box at reception for families and friends to leave feedback. You know, I think you need to be much more proactive if you're not already in seeking feedback regularly, acting on it. Another thing you will need to do is look at how your good care and good processes deliver good outcomes and evidence that to CQC. And once we know a bit more about the portal and what could be uploaded, my advice would be that you are proactively doing that in order to ensure a good outcome. So that's that on evidence categories. And I think Gemma's going to move on to talk about our favourite topic, ratings. So over to Gemma on the next slide.
Thanks, Laura. I don't know about favourite. It's definitely complex. And I think it will be, let's see how this all operates in practice. So the ratings will stay the same. So outstanding, good, requires improvement, and inadequate. But what is changing, as Laura has said, is the way that the CQC calculates ratings. So the CQC will use a scoring process to calculate ratings, and scores will be applied to evidence categories, quality statements, and key questions. The scoring process includes the CQC combining evidence category scores to give a quality statement score and combining quality statement scores to give a key question score. And then the process involves the scores being converted into percentages to give a key question percentage, and then ultimately an overall rating. So very complex, and we will just have to see how it all works out. Next slide, please. So this is my attempt to show the process. The evidence categories could be given a score of 4, which would reflect an exceptional standard of evidence, 3, which is a good standard of evidence, 2, which shows some shortfalls with the evidence, and 1, which is significant shortfalls with evidence. So the CQC will then combine the evidence scores to reach a total for that quality score. So that's the next line, the second section. And the CQC will turn the quality statement score into a percentage and then back into a score. And then use this score to update the key question score. So that's that third line, which in turn updates the overall rating. So it's a lot of mathematical. It's a mathematical process, and I think it really comes down to how will we be able to challenge it. So moving on to the next slide, please. Okay, so scores will inform the public of where the provider lies within a rating. For example, for a rating of good, the score will indicate if this is either in the upper threshold, nearing outstanding, or in the lower threshold, nearer to requires improvement. So at least the scores will provide providers with more information on where they sit. Percentage scores are used to support benchmarking information, which will be included in inspection reports and in the provider portal. And it will allow the service to be compared to other similar services in the area and country. Because the CQC will collect evidence on an ongoing basis, and Laura's mentioned that, they will be able to update scores for different evidence categories at any time, as well as quality statement scores and key question scores, and therefore the overall rating. So ratings will no longer be limited, or the updating of ratings will no longer be limited to an inspection. So providers will need to be on their guard more than ever before. What is concerning, as I've said, is that the CQC has not released information on how providers will be able to challenge decisions under the new regime, and whether there will be an adapted rating review process. Next slide, please. So moving on to rating limiters, under the current regime, rating limiters apply to the well-led rating and the overall rating. So a key rating limiter is the CQC determining that there is a breach of regulation. It is not clear if the current rating limiters will be applied and carried over to the new regime, particularly the breach of regulation rating limiter. However, the new guidance states if the key question score is within the good range, but there is a score of 1 for 1 or more quality statement scores, the rating is limited to requires improvement. And if the key question score is within the outstanding range, but there is a score of 1 or 2 for 1 or more quality statement scores, the rating is limited to good. So we will need to see how these limiters operate in practice. And as I say, we'll also need to see whether there will be additional limiters to these. Essentially, the CQC have discretion when applying ratings, they always have. And the CQC states that by using these rules, it can make any areas of poor quality, it can highlight basically any areas of poor quality, make sure they do not remain hidden. But what this looks like is the CQC will use its discretion and may pull down the overall score when one quality statement obtains a poor score. Now, my colleague Samantha Burgess has written an article. There's a link to the article in the slide, which goes into more detail on rating limiters. Back to Laura.
So yeah, I'm just going to quickly talk about something else that we know is changing, and then we're going to move on to talk about what we remain unsure about. But in terms of what is changing, and in terms of, I guess, the work that we do and the value we can add for providers in terms of assisting with your inspection, and that is your inspection report. Now, in summary, the reports are going to become shorter. I mean, the last change around report writing, guidance, etc., was a drive towards shorter reports. So, I mean, it's difficult to see how much shorter they are going to become and still be meaningful to anyone. There'll be a collection of summaries. They'll include benchmarking information, comparing it to other services in the area or in the country, indeed. That could be very interesting to see how that plays out. I know it's something that providers often are very upset about, is that the sort of this lack of the way things are just different between region to region, especially if you have homes in different regions. The CQC will continue to use their automated template text. Now, I absolutely hate the standard wording that they use for the report, and the fact that they're going to continue to use something like that, particularly if the reports are going to become even more short and summarised, is quite worrying, because this sort of, standard paragraphs pulled together to make a report makes it very difficult for it to be tailored to a service. It sometimes makes some inspectors resistant to make any changes because they just want to use what their template text is, even if it doesn't make any sense or even if it's contradictory to other areas of the report. I mean, I guess what we can see is that really and truly the changes are being made with the public in mind, not the provider. And you'll need to understand the state of the service to be able to improve it. Obviously, we haven't seen any reports come out under the new regime yet, so it's difficult to comment in detail about it. But, that's a sort of headline of the concerns. And we also, and Gemma will move on to talk about this, we don't really know what the process is going to be if you're not satisfied with the report, but there are quite a lot of red flags about these shorter inspection reports. How do they really give meaningful detail and context? And how do they allow you as a provider to know, what needs to be improved? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in practice. So that's what we know so far in terms of what's changing. If I could have the next slide, and we're going to move on to what we remain unsure about. And I'm going to cover the first heading here, which is the provider information returns, another bone of contention. I mean, back in the day, you got a PIR and you had a bit of a heads up that CQC was going to come to your service. They then moved on to doing it on the anniversary of the registration of your service, which then meant that sometimes you'd had an inspection, a week later you'd get a PIR, and then you wouldn't get an inspection visit, for 4 years, or maybe you're still waiting for your inspection visit, and then the PIR is completely out of date, couldn't be updated. Bit of a waste of everyone's time, to be honest. Maybe the portal will change this. I don't know. CQC have said that they are intending to make sure that they proactively ask you for information, but they're not sure if it will be in the form of a provider information return or if it will be some other way through the portal. And it sounded to me like this was still under discussion, which is a little bit worrying given that we're moving into the pilot phase and the rollout. And I would be interested to hear, hear providers' experience of this, particularly if there's anyone, who is in that very early phase. But yeah, CQC's focuses on planned and responsive assessment/inspection activity. How is it ongoing? What happens in between? They're saying there's going to be regular ongoing dialogue. What form is that going to be in? What's done with the information? Will it be through the portal? And back to my earlier slide on the portal, what if you're not happy with the information that's there? What's the opportunity for dialogue and challenge? Lots of unanswered questions for everyone at the moment. And then, if we could have the next slide, Gemma, I'll take you on to factual accuracy comments.
Thanks, Laura. So we also remain unsure about factual accuracy comments. The CQC has said that the fundamentals of the FAC process will remain unchanged, but have also said that the process will be improved. So we're yet to understand what these improvements will be. Some of our questions include, will the new improved FAC process be just for inspection reports or for any evidence collected by the CQC? So as Laura says, anything that goes on the provider portal, things that happen in between inspections. Will the FAC process itself move to the provider portal? And will the provider have an opportunity to challenge information or evidence from stakeholders such as local authorities? What we also remain unsure about, as well as factual accuracy comments, is the rating review process, which I touched upon earlier, and enforcement processes. So as mentioned, we wonder if the rating review process will change, given that the CQC can update ratings at any time. And we also wait to see how rating limiters will work in practice. In relation to enforcement, the CQC has said that it plans to improve its enforcement processes, but needs more time for testing this new improved process before rollout. Again, we don't know what these improvements are, and time is ticking, so it will be good to know what these improvements are, given that they are possibly still testing them. So back to Laura, who will take you through timelines. Thank you.
Yeah, so the timelines, time is ticking, and this is probably what everyone's most interested in, is when is this going to affect me, so I can prepare. And there's been a lot of criticism. I mean, this has been pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. I went on maternity leave almost 2 years ago, and I thought, I'm going to come back to a whole new job, a whole new inspection regime. And, here we are still trying to work out what's happening. But the published information from the Care Quality Commission has been that obviously there was the provider portal pilot in August 2023, September 2023 up to March next year. The provider portal was due to be rolled out to everyone. November was going to be the single assessment framework rollout, and we've recently seen that that's going to be regionally and starting off with a small number of providers. And by March 2024, the new regime would be in place and fully operational. If I could have the next slide, this is a bit more information about the key dates that CQC are thinking about, and this information hasn't come from CQC's website, but it has come from a few fairly reliable sources. Very reliable sources. You've probably seen them. It's come from some trade bodies that I think have had discussions with CQC, but I will caveat it with it wasn't, certainly, when I last checked on Friday, it wasn't yet on CQC's website. But the information that's been put out suggests that from the 21st of November, the early adopters, that's 14 services in the South region, and note that the South region does not include London. That would be those dates. Then from the 5th of December, Merry Christmas, everyone, the South region would get their rollout. Also on the 5th of December, they'd start using the new assessment approach with providers across the Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes ICS area. Then Happy New Year for London and the East region, 9th of January, looks like the date that you would be thinking at. And then for the 6th of February, North and Midlands region and NHS Trust well-led assessments. These are indicative timelines, they're key dates, and as with everything with this new regime, they are subject to review. And, I can only recommend that you keep on top of all of CQC's channels of information, make sure you get all their updates. Experience suggests that thus far, everything has been pushed back, although I think CQC have taken a lot of flack for that. And in some ways, it feels like that's why they're driving forward with these early dates at the moment, the November, December, which is a little bit crazy. If you look at, they were looking for your feedback on the quality statements and the evidence that they're going to gather. And I believe that feedback, the consultation process through the Citizen Lab portal, I think it's only just ended last week, so it doesn't leave much time for them to think about it. But I mean, there you are. That's the information that we've got about timelines at the moment. So Gemma will take you through, how you can prepare for this change. If we could have the next slide, please.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, so these are just kind of two main things that you can use to prepare for change. But as Laura says, it's about keeping up to date. I'd say just constantly keep looking at the CQC's website, take note of when the pages were last updated so that you can identify if there's been any changes, especially in relation to the new assessment guidance. So two of the main tools for preparing for change. One of them, as I say, is to check out CQC's guidance on its new approach, and it explains some of what we've covered in terms of quality statements, evidence categories, and so on. But another good tool to take a look at is the toolkits on the Skills for Care website. There is a toolkit for the current regime and also for the new regime, so at least you can make the comparison. So there are links to those on the slides as well. So next slide, please. So what we'll do is just summarise. I'll summarise and then Laura will conclude for us. So let's just look at what we've gone over today. So where it all began. So as I've mentioned, it began with the CQC strategy way back in 2021. And the CQC is now calling this change a complex transformation, which we are definitely seeing. What is changing? So we've covered that the provider portal is being introduced. CQC is reorganising internally, so you may need to liaise with assessors as well as inspectors. The single assessment framework is replacing the 4 assessment frameworks. So essentially, assessments will be ongoing. Chloe's prompts and ratings characteristics will be replaced by 36 quality statements, known as we statements, which is supported by I statements. So take a look at those in detail, as well as the 6 evidence categories. Ratings will be based on a scoring system combining evidence scores, quality statement scores, and key question scores. I think it's just wait to see how that all pans out. And then the main thing is that ratings can change at any time, so we all need to be alert to how we can challenge ratings when that information comes out. As Laura had gone over, reports will be shorter, containing summaries and benchmarking information. But we all know what's not changing is the ratings themselves of outstanding, good, etc., and the key questions, safe, caring, effective, etc. We've covered what we remain unsure about, so that includes providing information returns, the fact and accuracy process, the rating review process, and enforcement. And we have gone through the timelines. So simply, implementation will begin on the 21st of November in the South region, and the new regime is expected to be fully implemented by March next year. And to prepare for change, keep up to date with the CQC's website, keep looking at when the pages were last updated. I think that's the best way. And take a look at the Skills for Care toolkits to prepare for the big change. I will now hand to Laura, who will conclude. Thank you.
So yeah, just a final slide before we move on to questions, bringing it all together. I've had a quick squiz through some of the questions that are going to come, and I think the key point is the first on this slide is that there are still very many unanswered questions, and the fact that CQC are still gathering feedback, still drip feeding guidance, means that this is going to be the case for a long period of time. There isn't going to be, we can sit down in an hour and prepare you how to go through this regime, because how it's going to play out in practice is going to be it will remain to be seen, and it will be a learning process for everyone. CQC mentioned that, the inspector that I heard speak did talk about it being, seismic change, and it's anxiety inducing for everyone. Have said that CQC will work with you, and you should pick up the phone to your provider, to your contact, if that's easy for you to do, then that's to be welcomed. But it's not always easy, and there's a lot of personnel change at CQC. But the key thing to take away is that although this regime is new for CQC and providers, what is not new is that the legislative framework has not changed. Now, CQC, the underpinning CQC is the statutory, the legislation, the Health and Social Care Act 2008. That's where it gets its powers. That's why it does the inspection. That has not changed. The regulations have not changed. And yes, CQC have statutory powers to produce guidance and talk about how they will assess and rate, etc. But what you shouldn't get lost with, and what I think it's important that CQC don't get lost with, is that the underpinning legislative framework is still the same. Ultimately, you have to provide safe care in line with the regulations. And it's something that we've seen in the past. It's something that we see actually with regulatory breaches and inspection reports a lot. CQC get tied up about whether providers have met their own guidance on something, rather than when they're actually in breach of the legislation, which is the law. So that's something to think about carefully, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you think that you've had an unjustified rating or something unjustified in a report. And that's somewhere where, we would be able to assist. And, we remain here continuing to support providers. We're keeping ourselves up to speed with it as much as we can. And we really value the feedback and the information that you as providers give to us at the moment. So yeah, the summary is we're all trying to work it out. So many unanswered questions. But what we will try to do is answer some of your questions. Now I'll hand over to Caroline, who's going to chair the Q&A session, and we'll try our very best to answer them where we can. But we are able to see the questions offline, and it may be the case that, if there's things we can't answer today, or things that information comes in about in the future, you can guarantee that we'll be producing articles on it, etc. So make sure you're signed up to all of our channels to get your information. That information's on the last slide, but I'll pop you over to Caroline.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, Gemma. Really helpful. I mean, I think it demonstrates just how much information is still outstanding. As you say, there's so many unanswered questions. We have got a number of questions in. I have answered some. I've typed some answers as we've gone through, but I didn't want to take away your fun. So I thought I'd share the fun. And what I will do is go through just simply in order the Q&As that are still open. So I'm going to put the first one to you, Laura, because I think you just talked about PIRs. If you receive a PIR now, is it likely that you will be inspected under the new regime or the old regime?
Your guess is as good as mine. It's the short answer to that question. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be glib, that's not very helpful, but to be honest, you need to look at the region you're in and the timeframes, look at those indicative timeframes that have come out recently. I mean, it will do you no harm to be prepared under the new regime anyway, even if you are inspected under the old regime, because in theory you can say, well, this is brilliant evidence and well-led, good governance, preparing for change, etc. But the short answer is PIRs aren't really indicative. Well, in my experience of speaking with providers, PIRs are no longer indicative that you're about to get an inspection. So, you know, look at the timeframes, what's realistic, what region are you sitting in? Make sure that whatever regime you're preparing for, you're focusing on feedback and outcomes. These are things that are going to be so important, especially with these reports that are going to be focused for the public. They're going to be really interested in what your residents are saying, what your stakeholders are saying, and what your what your staff are saying. So, you know, make sure you've got all your ducks in a row in that regard. Sorry, I can't be more specific or more helpful.
Thanks, Laura. Question, maybe one for Gemma, because I think you spoke around the new structure that is coming in, or the new teams at CQC. We've been asked, commented around the scheme of delegation allows inspection managers to issue warning notices, and for everything else, it's the heads of inspection that take higher level enforcement action. Do we know if that's going to change at all in terms of the level of enforcement action and who can issue relevant action?
I don't have the answer. I don't know. I suppose just kind of bearing on what I've said, the enforcement is still led by the inspector. But as to who issues it, I don't know. Apologies. Okay. But something we can look out for as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, obviously the inspectors are the face, aren't they, most of the time for CQC. And I think most of the time action is just signed off by someone higher, but really it's based on the evidence that's being presented and gathered by the inspectors.
That's right. And I say as well, the channels that we would use to get that information is obviously the CQC's website, also their board meetings as well, and their board papers, which sometimes do lend to giving information about the structure of the team and the management at the management level.
Yeah, absolutely. The board meetings are extremely helpful. I picked up quite a lot of information from those. So yeah, they are definitely worth a watch. Next question. Is it your view that there will be an increase in enforcement activity with the regulations being more directly linked to the standard CQC look at? Open that up to either of you.
I think they've always linked. Sorry, Laura. No, I was just going to say they've always linked the regulations to the guidance. So the CLOEs have that direct link. I would say it comes down to the scoring and how easy it will be for them to score you at a lower level. Thereby, I think that then kind of indicates whether they will then take any regulatory action. But I think that link between the scoring and the regulatory breach also is not necessarily clear in what's been put out. I'll hand to Laura if you've got.
Laura, do you want to add anything?
Just add it. I mean, I don't know whether it will be as a result of them being more directly linked to the regulations, but what I think will be interesting to see how it plays out. And we've seen a bit of this, post-COVID and in the the way that they focus on risk at the moment as part of their inspection regime, depending on what information they gather through the PIR. If it's only going to be things that are problems, things that are issues, then yes, we may, it's not PIR, sorry, the portal, things that we would see as red flags, or whether they're going to use the portal as they say they are, you know, for the positive information as well. There is a risk that if it's just used as alerts, or if it's used with the focus on feedback, which they keep talking about, and, you know, this is where we need to encourage residents where it's possible, but also your families and relatives to give feedback directly to CQC. At the moment, I would say it's the experience of a number of clients that I deal with that people only give negative comments direct to CQC. You know, they comment them to say that you're not doing X, Y, and Z right. Under the new regime, CQC are going to be really focused on that feedback. And if that then causes them to look at the service and look at the, you know, the ratings, they might think about more enforcement action. So as part of your drive to gather feedback and to prepare for the new regime, I think you want to be directing people to provide positive feedback directly to CQC, especially until we know how it's going to work on the portal, where you'll have some control of uploading that. I think you should, you know, find some way through your relatives and residents meetings or the feedback forms that you send out, you know, to encourage people to provide positive feedback to CQC as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would also add just, you know, obviously we've seen at Ridouts generally more enforcement action being taken by the CQC since COVID because of the risk-based approach. And Laura, you mentioned, you know, that we think that this is still going to be fairly risk-based moving forward. CQC have now specifically set out the regulations that are linked under the evidence categories, which is more joined up. And I think one thing that we were always doing at Ridouts under the old regime, if I can call it that, was within factor accuracy comments and putting forward challenges to reports, we would always be linking it back to the law, because CQC weren't always doing that. You know, that they are making it more, they're bringing the regulations more to the fore, but as Laura said, the law hasn't changed. That is the standard by which you have been judged for 13-ish years. So I think we're going to continue to see a general increase of enforcement action by CQC, because that seems to be the flavour of the month or year. We've got a question about, I think this has been answered, you know, would complaints be used in feedback from people's experience? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think both Laura and Gemma have touched on this, that feedback is key with the new regime, and they are going to be focusing on that significantly. So yes, complaints are going to be very pertinent, and that's where Laura has said trying to gather positive feedback is always going to help, or try to help to counter any negatives. Okay, so CQC have produced a grid of what evidence categories apply to what service types, and outcomes are not highlighted for any services except GP. What do we make of that? So I think this is something where under the key categories, outcomes, which I have to say I've highlighted this in a talk that I gave recently around this new regime, you know, on the basis that CQC is an outcome-based regulator, apparently, that outcomes aren't a focus under the evidence categories. CQC are saying outcomes relate to, I suppose, data, KPIs like death rates, etc. But I don't know whether Laura and Gemma, you want to add anything in relation to looking at outcomes for service users in respect of evidence that's being gathered by the CQC.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that you go, Laura, you go first.
I just as we were speaking about it, I saw this question pop up and I thought I'd have a look. I'm assuming that you're referring to this Excel document that CQC have produced detailing, you know, what evidence categories go with what key question, go with what service. Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre that they haven't highlighted outcomes as an evidence category, where, you know, things like observation and processes, they're going to naturally lead on to outcomes. I think, you know, perhaps it's what Caroline touched on, it being a sort of a binary approach to what they define as an outcome. And maybe in terms of like the types of information that NHS services can gather, ambulance services in terms of outcomes, but you know, there's actually not a lot of them that are highlighted with outcomes. I still wouldn't detract from what I've said about preparing from inspections and talking about how your good care and your processes, etc., lead to good outcomes for your service users, because that's ultimately how you're going to get the good feedback from them, from family members, have the good documentation to produce that, and that's what's going to provide the underpinning evidence, if you like, for your rating. So I would still recommend that is something that you focus on. Another thing I would say is that literally the consultation on this has just closed. It may be that this is something that's going to be further updated as things roll out. I wouldn't be surprised if that changes, but I wouldn't not look at outcomes. It's just maybe outcomes in a different, thinking outside of the box with it, in terms of, you know, how you've done something good for a service user has led to a good outcome of an improvement in their quality of life. Hopefully that helps.
Gemma, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's just to use the provider portal to benefit yourself as a provider, because hopefully it is a two-way system. I think it was concerning when we watched the most recent CQC webinar that they've said that they won't collect evidence for all the categories. So some may be missed out, and this is clearly showing that, you know, outcomes is probably something they're not going to focus on. But I'd say that doesn't mean as a provider you shouldn't try to capture all those evidence categories, especially if you're showcasing the good in your service. So try to use the provider portal to benefit you and to capture all the good in all those evidence categories.
Thank you, Gemma. I'm conscious we're approaching the hour. I'm going to just run through 3 or 4 more questions. For anyone who questions we haven't got to, we will have a review of them. And if you're happy, we will do our best to answer those. Either we'll do it on our website or we'll contact you directly with thoughts on your questions. I think I'm just going to jump ahead a couple of questions rather than doing order here, because Gemma, you just touched on about putting evidence on the portal, and one of the questions is, you know, am I correct in thinking we are to put evidence on the new portal? You know, how much evidence can people put on there in order to prove positive or put forward positive outcomes and you know, meeting the regulations?
I mean, it's hard to say without seeing it. One experience I've got with one client is there was a limitation in the word count. This was for registration purposes. So that is a concern, that you might be limited in what you can put and how much information, how much detail can be added. But yes, again, you've got to be careful as well, because all of this is part of monitoring. So from a provider perspective, make sure it's good evidence. You want to be showcasing good, because you may want to be upgrading your rating. But also at the same time, know, and we say this when we're dealing with factual accuracy comments, when you're submitting evidence, look at the evidence carefully, look at the information carefully, and make sure there are no red flags in it, and that expose you. So be on your guard, essentially, but still try and put that message across to the CQC that you are providing good quality care.
I mean, we see the limitation you've obviously mentioned around limitations around the registration process. We've got a character limit or word limit in relation to rating reviews, haven't we, currently? And I wouldn't be surprised if CQC put some sort of limit on it, because can you imagine that they're just going to get bombarded with the volume of information that people are going to put forward to say, well, you now have this information as a public body, you're going to have to review it and make a decision based on that information before you. So it could become very unmanageable if it's a free-for-all. But again, as you say, Gemma, we're going to have to wait and see.
That was something that the inspector that I heard speak raised, that very point, actually, that she's hoped that the portal would be a two-way street, but then she sort of went off on a bit of a tangent and said, well, yeah, but obviously we're going to have to think about some way of limiting what can be uploaded, because otherwise it will become unmanageable. But we're still working that out, and that was only a couple of weeks ago. So I think it is something we're all going to have to just wait and see play out.
Okay, thanks. One question here is about, how obviously we've had your planned timetabled inspections in the past. One question is relating to basically how often can your rating change? Can it drop in the same year? Can it go up in the same year? And I think the answer is it could change every day if CQC wanted to, if the evidence is there. But do you want to just comment on, obviously there's more content, CQC want to bring more contemporary ratings to the fore. So I don't know whether Laura or Gemma, you want to comment any more on that in terms of, the frequency of change that's possible.
Yeah, well, they have. I mean, I think this is what underpins their whole system, I think, is that they want to be able to make those contemporaneous changes to ratings and be able to do that in real time, as they say. Now, what real time will translate to in real life under, the resource restrictions that CQC work under will be something that remains to be seen. But what we don't have is any concrete information about inspection timeframes, and that's a deliberate move on the part of CQC. So essentially, you don't know when they're going to come back. You don't know how often your rating will be updated. I think, yes, it is, to answer the question, it is a possibility that it will be updated frequently in the same year, could go up, could go down. How that will work in practice is another thing. I'm sorry that we keep saying this, but it just is the answer at the moment. Is we're going to have to see how it plays out. Resources will be a huge thing because CQC have to remain on top of all this information, and how that's going to work we just don't yet know. But yes, you should be live to the possibility of frequent change, which, I mean, in theory, if it's all working well and you can provide your information, it should be of benefit to providers, the public, and people using the service. And again, I hark back to this old people sitting with requires improvement for years and years. What's out there in the public is not a contemporaneous account of how your service is operating, and very much these days, an inspection is carried out, the report takes months and months and months to be produced. If there's factual accuracy, then there's that challenge time. Quite often the report that's in the public domain bears no bearing to the actual service, at the time it's produced. And yet press releases are going out about, a report that's months and months old. So, it could be a very positive thing. And you should bear that in mind if you use it to your advantage, like Gemma has said. And I think actually, while CQC are working it out, and before they do put any arbitrary limits on it, do use it to your advantage and produce as much positive information to make this new system work for you.
Right.
At the same time, I was just going to add that I think that if a particular provider is a target, I know it's sometimes odd language to use, but we do see it, is a target of CQC, the CQC will update the rating, I think, probably more frequently than you would expect. So I've got a client who waited years for an inspection, sought an inspection from CQC, requested it, got the inspection, and this is obviously under the current regime, and then challenged the rating. CQC have gone back again because of that challenge. So it's then 2 inspections in the space of about 9 months, yet they had to wait for about 3-4 years for the first inspection. So I think when CQC want to challenge a provider, they will come out, and obviously with this new regime, they won't even need to come out to update the rating. So just be on your guard. I think it can be as frequent as the CQC desire.
Thank you, Gemma. I'm going to just do one last question. I'm going to bat it back over to you, Gemma, because you've just mentioned around they don't even need to come out CQC in order to change your rating. The question is, have CQC indicated how far enforcement action could go without a site visit? This is the question of assessment versus inspection, isn't it?
It is, and no, they haven't. And the enforcement side of things is severely lacking in terms of information. Yeah, I have no answer. I just actually can't wait to see what they come out with in terms of linking it. The enforcement policy and the decision tree will need to be updated, and we're yet to see that.
Thank you. Laura, anything to add to that? You don't have
I,
to.
no, I don't think so. I'm not going to talk at you for the sake of talking, but I'm also interested to see how it plays out. It's been a long time coming, and I do think it's easy, and we see it because most often providers contact us as a bit of a distress purchase when they need some help, and CQC is the bad guy. There are a lot of things to remain positive about. I mean, people don't often hear me talk optimistically about CQC, but it is an opportunity. It is a change. You can use it to work for your advantage. It will have glitches, but that's on the CQC side. That's not on you. Remember that the regulations haven't changed. You're potentially getting these opportunities to present your service in a good light much more regularly than you were before. So let's try and hang on to some of the positives for it. But remember that we're here to help you if you do need any assistance.
Thanks. I think on that note, we'll end on a high. We'll end on a positive. As I mentioned, we will, for those whose questions we haven't been able to answer, we're going to gather them. We're going to have a look at them. We'll either try and put some answers onto our website, or we'll contact you directly. We've had a few more questions around whether the slides are available, whether recording is going to be available. Answer is yes, slides are going to be sent out hopefully to you later on today. A recording, once the recording is ready, will be uploaded to our website and our YouTube channel. You can find the details on this last slide in relation to all our contact details. As Laura mentioned right at the beginning, doing a fab job of asking you to sign up if you want to keep up to date with our thoughts on the new regime and anything in the health and social care sector. You can find details on this slide about how to sign up to our newsletter at our website /subscribe. And I think it just remains to say thank you to everyone who's been on this call. Thank you for everyone who's inputted to the Q&As and given some helpful insights. And we will await to see what happens in November when we see how the portal goes. So thanks everyone. See you all soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.